In the series of conversations with Professor Amartya, we have been discussing a certain number of themes contained in a report called Civil Paths to Peace. It was commissioned by the Commonwealth, and this Commission on Respect and Understanding was chaired by Professor Sen. Today, in this ultimate conversation, we shall carry forward some of the conclusions of this report. Much has changed in the world since your report was published in 2007, in particular the economic situation. Did you anticipate that it would deteriorate so much so quickly?
Well, I think as far as the economic situation is concerned, I personally, as an economist, actually did, because there were many danger signs, including the kind of demolition of controls in the financial system in America, worried many people. I'm not the only one to worry about that. The worry turned out to be not exaggerated, quite the contrary. In fact, it was much worse than we thought. But people had worried about that. The stock market's odd behavior had worried even industrialists. A number of people have commented on that. No, I think there was trouble coming, but we didn't know how much it would be. And it all came together because, there was this oil price hike, and earlier there had been the food price hike, and then suddenly came this meltdown. And then, as Keynes has discussed so well, that one meltdown leads to other meltdowns, and we are still in the process of just ratcheting ourselves down and down and down. I think the dangers were present and perceived, but I think one would be misleading if one said that one knew exactly what was going to happen. But the report isn't really based so much on continued economic prosperity. We think of harder days as well as easier ones. And there have been other changes, of course, which have not been negative. I think the general acceptance of multilateralism, which is a big part of the Commonwealth approach, is much greater now. The countries, we have to remember when America went to war in Iraq, it got support from practically everywhere.
That's right.
Even from the New York Times, which later on, of course, turned very much against. And there were very few that were against, that war. I think people regard that was a mistake. I think the fact that the multilateral approach and a quick and a more talking approach would have been better. In this case, not talking with the terrorists, but talking a bit more with the Iraqis would have made a big difference. I think that is understood. That's a big thing. I think Obama's election already reflects a changing world in which that global perception is important. I have to say, to the credit of Obama, that right from the electoral beginning, he had been placing himself both as a patriotic American as well as a person concerned with very global citizenship responsibilities, and his own background makes that clear. I think in many ways that's much more on the scene today than before. So, in some respect, the problems are probably harder than when the book was published, the report was published. In other ways, we have moved along forward in the direction that we hope. And of course, the countries of the Commonwealth countries are working in this direction. Britain took an early lead on that, and other countries.
You see multilateralism at work to address the economic situation. I mean, what are the kind of mechanisms that?
Yes, that always comes up, and we have to see what comes. I mean, I'm personally involved in two of them. One by an initiative by President Sarkozy and Tony Blair, Prime Minister Tony Blair. And there's a meeting on the 8th and 9th in Paris, to which I'm going, and Joe Stiglitz is, and we were among the first to be recruited for that meeting. And this is going to be an entirely multilateral approach. I'm also a member of a commission that was set up by the president of IMF to rethink the global financial architecture in the world. Now, I don't really have the qualifications so much to do these things, but when people ask me, I have to say yes, because after all, it is an important cause. But these initiatives have come in a big way, and certainly in the IMF context, we are thinking of fairly radical restructure of the financial system in the world. We've seen other things. The world relies less and less on G7 or G8 and more on G20, which among other things also include Brazil, China, and India. I personally think it should be even broader, because sometimes China and India and Brazil don't really act in the interest of the poorer or less dynamic parts of the developing world, particularly in Africa. It became clear in the Doha round when basically Brazil, China, and India busted it, whereas many African countries would have benefited for what the Americans and the Europeans were putting on table, even though they are not willing to accept the demands of China, India, and Brazil. So I think there are these issues. Is it sufficiently multilateral? Perhaps G20 is not yet that multilateral, certainly in terms of our reform. We want an even more multilateral representation of all. There are difficulties. We're not naive people. We are practical people too. We recognize the difficulties. So we have to see how it goes. But there have been moves in multilateral directions connected with the financial crisis, as well as general economic outlook for the future.
I'm going to end with a personal note, if you permit me. It's here in Shantiniketan, and that's what your autobiographical note says, that you were exposed to cultures other than Western cultures. It's also here that you got your first intimations of the need for social equity and so on. And therefore my question is, what does it feel like to return to the source, so to speak, 3 or 4 times a year?
Well, more than 3 or 4 times, like 5 times. Yeah, I think it's it's a delight. It's a place where I was schooled, and all my early experiences very connect with things I saw and understood. It's not just not only the Western culture, but not only Indian culture either. Of course, that's present constantly with us. But you're absolutely right that quite often in schools in Calcutta or Dhaka, I had a sense that for them the West meant like Britain, really. But on the other hand, here there were French and Italian teachers, and there were outside Europe there were Chinese and Japanese and Thais and Indonesians and Malaysians, and then on the West, coming from the Middle East and African influence too. And I think that was wonderful for me to see how rich the world is, and culturally rich, intellectually rich, and in terms of kind of global dialogue of excitement about the different ways of doing things and to what extent we agree, and very often turned out we agreed enormously, even though we use rather different language to use that. That was a tremendous experience. I think Rabindranath Tagore's ideas were very big in mind. When I was young, I thought that there was perhaps too much Tagore here. But on the other hand, over time I could see that level of reliance on human freedom and reliance on reasoning, which I think the two characteristics that separate out Rabindranath Tagore as a thinker, and that goes against imperialism, but goes against Indian nationalism as well. It goes against Western dominance, but it also goes in favor of accepting the best of Western culture, the poetry, the drama, and the music, and so on. So I think that compromise, that understanding, that capacious vision of what life is like is a matter of huge importance to me. And it's only later I recognized how much of that has become part of myself without my recognizing that. It's little like learning to swim. You don't know which is the moment when you learn to swim, but there was a moment when you are no longer sinking.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks very much, Dileep.
And this brings to a close the series of conversations we've had with Professor Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize winner. These conversations were held here in Shantiniketan, and it's in Shantiniketan that Professor Sen was born 75 years ago, and it is here that he had his early education. It is here too that he developed the insights which later on served him to very good purpose in several universities around the world. Thank you very much. Goodbye.